Thank you everyone for joining. This is the Case Western Reserve University Entrepreneurship Speaker Series. And today we have Hallie Kogelschatz from Shark and Minnow. She's going to discuss her career journey, entrepreneurship, how COVID-19 crisis impacts her business and consulting. And today we have this facilitated by Queenie Tang, who is a BS in marketing and international business. And Queenie, I'm going to hand it over to you to introduce Hallie and take it from here.
Yeah, of course. Hello, everybody. My name is Queenie Tang, and I'm a third-year student double majoring in marketing and international business. So I have been involved with the Veale Institute since the fall of this year when I had the opportunity to attend the Entrepreneurship Trek in San Francisco with Michael. So I just want to say a quick welcome and thank you so much for joining us today. And I'll start jumping in with the first question. So Hallie, from your very impressive resume, you're the CEO and president of Shark and Minnow, which you founded in 2013 with your husband, Eric. So what do you think has been the biggest challenge that you have faced as an entrepreneur so far?
Well, first and foremost, I'll say thank you for having me here. It's exciting to talk entrepreneurship. It's something I'm deeply passionate about. I will say that my entire career, having worked for other people up until founding my own company, it was always something that I saw as a measure of success. My entire family is built up of entrepreneurs. And so I think in the back of my mind, until I had a firm of my own, it wasn't going to feel quite like the success that I had been looking for. And it took me a long time to realize that, even though I kind of knew it, I think at my core. It took me working for a lot of other people to really realize that forging my own path was the right path for me. As far as challenges go, I think that there's a lot of trial and error when you start your own firm, even though you think that there's a tried and true way to do things. You can't be afraid to test ideas. And I'll give you one example of that. When we first started our firm, we thought that our hiring model should be to hire true specialists. This is really like an old ad agency model. You have your account manager and you have your, editor and you have your, strategist, and never, the three shall meet, so to speak. And we tried that. And, our industry is one that's heavily being impacted by technology. And for various other reasons, we just felt like that wasn't really working in the way we wanted it to work. And so we, through trial and error, decided that we wanted to completely uproot our hiring model, our structure, and create cross-disciplinary teams. And so just because you may be hired in and your primary role at Shark and Minnow might be a designer, it doesn't mean that you're never going to be conceptually thinking in motion-based design and working hand in hand with an editor to construct projects that really create that cross-disciplinary sharing of ideas and conceptualizing of ideas. And so, I would say that was one of the challenges that we, kind of ran into in the first year in startup mode, right? You're trying to figure out how you want to be structured. I think another thing that we've learned over the years is what kind of firm we want to be. And because of the firm that we want to be, the types of clients that aren't really the right types of clients for ours. And so it doesn't happen very often, but we have had a few challenging relationships where what it came down to was, as much as I would love the revenue and to keep billing, certain projects to clients, there are certain clients that, we just know are not the right kinds of clients for the firm. And it's not good for them and it's not good for us to continue on those paths. And so we've had to have some very challenging conversations with clients that aren't looking for strategic thinking, that are truly looking for tactical, one and done kind of work. It's not that we never take on that work, but we want to work within a strategic framework with clients. And so if we're going to be working tactically, we still want to know that we're creating work that's going to work for those clients. And so it really is a shared sort of mindset that we work within. And for us, knowing when that's not present and walking away more quickly than too late is really important, because there's nothing that's more important for entrepreneurs than maintaining your relationships so that your reputation stays intact for the long term. You don't want it to get out there that you're not a good fit, that you're not workable, because obviously in the long term, the hope is that you're going to have happy clients, which we're very fortunate that we do. And they oftentimes refer you to other clients because they're very pleased with your work. And so you have to let your relationship stay intact. And if that means walking away from, certain pieces of business, then that's something, that you need to be prepared to do. So those are two challenges that I thought of right off the bat. But also, I will say that, we work very hard to hire the right people. We had a position open last year that, we had many qualified candidates, they had the skill set that made them a right fit on paper. But when we went into interviews, we take a lot of time interviewing candidates. What we realized was they didn't quite embody the set of values or the ethos that we were looking for at Shark and Minnow. And so we had one position in particular where we screened over 200 candidates for this position. And, we weren't finding the right fit for us, and we didn't feel it was the right fit for our client. And so in the interim, because, I've worked in other markets, as have other members of our team, this became a very positive thing for clients, because what we learned was we could pull on our international book of talent and hire both contract employees, part-time employees, and full-time employees to service clients and bring in the right set of skills for each project. So it allowed us to be a lot more flexible, and it allowed us to also think, in different ways about how the work gets created and the value of having both full-time and extemporaneous talent working side by side.
Awesome. Thank you for that. So we actually have our first question from startups. So if you want to unmute your mic, feel free to ask your question. All right, so his or her question was, in terms of strategic consulting with larger clients, have you noticed Peter Principle in real life? People rising to their level of incompetence, do you think that senior level folks truly deserve their compensation?
Yeah, so I will say that in the world of, when you look at traditional agency models in the world of communications, there are a lot of people where truly it's not their fault, but they just are not prepared to go into that next role. Management is not something that comes easy to a lot of people, nor is senior level creative or strategic thinking. And so it really takes strong mentorship, and it also takes a sense of inward motivation to rise to that next level. And, this desire to be that continual learner. So we talk about it a lot at Shark and Minnow, but one of the things that makes us different is we always talk about being innately curious. And I think that that's one of the principles that we look for in candidates is, are you curious? What are you doing to forward your own learning? How are you going to contribute to this environment aside from what's in your job description? And I think that makes our team very different. It also makes it a place where, to be honest, it's very hard to get hired at Shark and Minnow because we look for those A players. And once we know that you're coming in with that fire in your belly, we know that we can train you on tools and skills. You need to have that passion coming in. And I think if you start with that, it helps to alleviate, some of that stress as you move through your career. It helps to make it more possible that you won't see those heightened levels of incompetence, because people really do want to improve. They're going to be asking those questions to help their own personal development without you as a manager always having to sit down with them at a performance review and say, hey, these are the things I really need for you to work on. And in fact, I will say that, we do monthly meetings with each of our employees so that it's never a surprise. If I feel something isn't working, or if they feel something isn't working, we can always address those things in the moment. And so it's not like, at some firms where you're a year out from being hired and it's like, surprise, this hasn't been working all year, but we haven't had a conversation about it. And because of the types of people that we hire, and because of the way that we coach them on an ongoing basis, most of the time, if there's something that isn't working, it's something that management and the employee themselves has already identified. I don't feel like I go into too many conversations with my staff. And I'll say it's true for my management style. It's been at Shark and Minnow, but it's also something that I've used in other firms. I don't feel like I go into too many conversations with my staff where I'm surprising them with an issue. And it's always presented in a way that is in the spirit of improvement. I never want to trick my employees. I never want them to feel like I'm trying to trip them up. my feedback is always aimed at allowing them to identify where they have room to grow and allowing them to be as successful as possible. It's not a benefit to anybody to set up managers or senior level talent to fail. So I think, I hope that answers the question. Let me know if it didn't. But I do think that, to answer the final piece of that question, do senior level folks truly deserve their compensation? I think it depends on what they're bringing to the table. And I also think there are a lot of senior level folks that are grossly underpaid because of economic conditions that have happened. I know a lot of people, unfortunately, that I worked with back, when the recession hit in 2008, 2009, that never recovered financially from that. They are still underpaid and working at levels that are far below, particularly on the coasts, that are far below, compensation that they had been paid previously. So it really depends. But I think, the compensation should suit what you're bringing to your team. And if you're really kind of bringing your A game every day or you're not, you can feel it. And so that's why we always start with passion and being hungry. And that helps, at every stage of one's career, I think.
We do have a question that just came in from Facebook from Pierre Luigi. How did you find your journey to finding your startup?
Well, I had sort of like a varied path. I did not intend to go into strategy. I actually was a film major with a double minor in marketing and fiction writing, so very different. And when I graduated, I grew up here in Cleveland, but when I graduated, I was living in Boston, and I realized I was going to move to LA, and had done some work freelancing in New York. And I realized that I never wanted to move to LA. And that's kind of a problem if you have a film degree. So you got to figure out something else to do. And a mentor of mine, I went to Emerson College in Boston. I see a few other Emerson alum on this call. And a mentor of mine in college said to me, he was the chair of the marketing department at the time. He said, "Hey, I know that you didn't think that you wanted to go into communications, but you're good at it. And there's a shop where I think you'll feel culturally that it's a right fit." And so I needed a job, and I interviewed there, and it felt like home. It felt like a family. Culturally, it is the closest thing to my own firm that I have ever worked for. It was an independent shop called Modernista. It no longer exists, which I can get into later if anyone's interested. But it was an incredible place full of like really divergent thinkers. Everyone was constantly coming to the table with new ideas. Like good was not good enough. It was a high pressure situation for sure. But it taught me that I wanted to do a job where no 2 days were the same, and I could always use my brain. I could always be thinking and learning and, bringing something new to the table and helping clients. And I had the ability to work on some really exciting campaigns, pieces of national and global business. And to me, you kind of get that fire in your belly. You realize that you like to be the one to help creative problem solve. And, that media background. And when I was studying film, I had intended to be a producer. That was what I was going to go do out in Los Angeles. And I realized that skill set is the same kind of skill set that you have to have in any job to be successful. You have to know how to solve problems. You have to know how to manage budgets. You have to know how to manage timelines and schedules. You have to know how to run a team. You have to work with creative talent, financial talent, strategic talent. You have to find a way to make it all work. And I think that those skills are really helpful in entrepreneurship because you have to wear so many hats. But again, much in the same way, I want to hire passionate talent. I knew that I had a passion for creating work that worked early on. So I think that really helped me to find my path. And frankly, that's why, being the CEO of a consultancy is really exciting for me because it's not just about marketing. There are a lot of projects that we work on, a lot of, kind of big strategic projects where marketing may be an outcome, but it may not be an outcome. It could be about, digitalization of a business. It could be about, thinking through like staffing and org charts, or it could be research-based. There are so many ways that strategy comes into play that it allows us to apply it for clients across all different kinds of industries in different ways. So I think the most important thing in finding your own path is really finding the thing that makes you tick. And I think a good litmus test on that is like if you have a job, and I've had these too, where you have to psych yourself up to get up out of bed in the morning and you don't want to go. And, that's a good, you learn as much about yourself from those kinds of experiences as well, where it's like, I don't ever want to do that again. I never want to work in a job where I feel that way again. So that, helps you to kind of like hone in on, where do I want to go in my career, and then start to forge a roadmap for how to get there.
So we have another question from Sarah. So she said, as someone with my own consultancy, because I have a diverse experience and skill set, I have 3 lines of services. One of the questions I continually get is where my real niche is. How have you balanced having a specific niche versus providing an array of complementary services?
Well, I think at your core, that, you may have a lot of different skill sets, which, obviously we do at Shark and Minnow as well, but that there are certain things that you do better than anybody else. And I think it takes a lot of, kind of soul searching and just being very honest with yourself about the things that you're good at and the things that you're not good at, and being very honest with your clients about, these are some things that we can certainly help you with, but we're going to bring in a specialist to handle this piece of the project, or whatever the case may be. So I think the positioning of your consultancy is really important. I think that when you look at the projects that you've been most successful on in the past, it'll give you some clues into where you should really be positioning yourself in the future. But it doesn't mean that you can't offer other services. I mean, my firm, for example, grew very organically. We intended to, when my husband and I started the firm, we intended to be a husband and wife consultancy. We were just going to work with, a small book of business. And the fortunate problem that we had was that our clients were very happy, and they, would work on us with strategic projects, with us on strategic projects. But then they said, well, we don't want to stop working with you. Can you help us out with design? Do you have a designer? Do you have, and then it grew into other disciplines, digital work and media buying and planning. And, the truth is I don't do all of those things, but I've hired experts that do. And so we were able to in-house a lot of those things, not because we want to be an all under one roof agency, but because we want to, if we're going to do these things, we want to be the best at it for our clients. And we're going to hire the right people that can help us do that. So our scope of work for any 2 clients, it doesn't look the same. Some of our clients say, oh, that's our video production company. And some of our clients say, oh, those are our brand strategists. So it really means creating custom solutions for every client, and making sure that they understand what you can do well, and the things where you're willing to be honest and say there's a better fit for you here, but we'll figure out how to make that work for you.
Anna, would you like to ask your question yourself?
Oh, that's a tough question, Anna.
Okay, I'll repeat it. So if you were graduating this year, what path would you go in this strange time? Entering the workforce, or doing a startup, or something else?
So I also graduated in a recession, and I won't tell you which one because that outs my age. But I will tell you that the most important thing that you can do is rack up that experience, and find someone that you really respect and somebody that you really can learn from. And that's actually my advice when I mentor people that are at the junior level of their career, no matter what the market circumstances are. No matter the field, if you're going into that job, whether it's a job or an internship, if it's paid, if it's unpaid, if you're not at your junior level of your career and there and with a boss that can really teach you and train you and let you ask questions and learn from them, if you're not being inspired, if you're not, at an organization that's letting you answer some of your questions about what you might want to do later in your career, then you may be giving them something in that experience, but they're not giving enough back to make it worth your time. So I think right now the most important thing that you can do, and obviously everybody needs to get paid, you have to live, I understand that. But if you can find a way to make it work, to get yourself into a situation where you can learn on the job, you will be more successful in the long term and you will be more valuable to the types of organizations that you may want to work for. So get that experience early, try a lot of things. Also use your downtime to really look into things that may build that toolkit of skills that you can bring to the table. So, research where the industry that you're in is going and try and figure out what you need to know to be, as competitive of a candidate, once the markets open up. And I will say, there are many employers that are going to be hiring. They're going to need talent in the next few months. For better or worse, in economic downturns, a lot of what happens is, the senior level talent, the intermediate level talent gets shed. And there are more available openings for junior level talent or people that are willing to come in and work at a more, economical salary. So it's not necessarily a bad time to be a junior level candidate coming into the market. But I think the most important thing to think about is not just how can I fill a seat, but how am I going to make this something that's valuable to me, when I look back in 5 years, and how have I used this time to really, innovate in my own life, and not just, provide a, kind of hands on deck for an employer.
So let me ask a question, pivoting just a little bit about the current COVID-19 pandemic. And as a small firm in the Cleveland area, especially a small firm that's largely B2B in nature, where your business and its self-sufficiency actually depends on how well other companies are doing, what are you finding challenging during this time to help keep your company moving forward and growing? And, what does that response look like?
So you're asking about what are the challenges during COVID-19 or what's, okay.
Yeah.
I think, so what I'll say is not necessarily for our company, and I'll explain why in a moment, but for a lot of entrepreneurs and business leaders that I know, I'm very fortunate. I have a network of people that I would call friends and colleagues that also own their own businesses across the country. And one thing that surprised me is how little long-term planning a lot of them have done to prepare for economic moments like this. I will say that, it's not that it hasn't been a challenging period for us. Certainly financially is the biggest impact on any service-based firm. There are many of our clients that, we work heavily in B2B, but we also work, pretty equally in B2C and nonprofit. And we have a lot of clients that frankly have had to divert bills. We have a lot of clients that have just come to us like desperate, can't pay. We do have some clients that have a very rare, but a few of them were desperate enough to ask if they could cancel contracts. And there aren't many of those. And I'm fortunate to be able to say that because, I have, very, close personal, friends who run businesses where that's not the case. They've seen themselves like practically wiped out. I think what's made it a good lesson learned in this time for a lot of people, and it was one that I was fortunate enough to have learned back in 2008, is to prepare for the worst case scenario. So I have, I had an employee say to me last year that they felt that at times my outlook could be really negative. And I had to explain to this employee that I'm actually a very optimistic person, but it's my job as CEO to consider what happens when the bottom falls out. What happens when the worst thing that you can imagine from a business standpoint happens? And how do you prepare your business so that if that should happen, you're not going to see yourself in a position where you have to do one of two things: A, make major layoffs, or B, shutter your doors. And I saw that happen with the first firm I worked for. I mentioned at the beginning of this conversation, I worked for a firm that I loved. I worked on big, exciting brand campaigns. That firm made, they were incredibly bright people, but made some really glaring mistakes when it came to weathering economic downturns and being able to plan for the worst. In fact, I think there was, there wasn't as much planning as I would have hoped. And luckily I had moved on to another job at that point, but it was heartbreaking to see them shutter their doors, and I never wanted, when I went into business for myself, I never wanted to see that happen. And my employees hear me say this all the time, that we are not risk averse as a company, but we are very calculated in the kinds of risks we make and when. We are very, very slow to hire and very, very slow to fire, I like to say, because we want the right people there, and I will do whatever I can to protect their jobs as a result. We're very lucky that we are fiscally conservative in that way, that we can, when things do take a downturn, it allows us to be a little bit more creative with how we can weather the storm. So again, it's not that it hasn't been a challenging period for us, but in terms of like the real tangible challenges of something like COVID-19 and the economic fallout, we were better prepared than most. I will say the hardest thing for me personally as a CEO has been the mental and emotional piece. I'm an endurance runner, and I keep comparing this to a marathon, which I think is an easy analogy. But that's the hardest thing about endurance running. You sometimes in that race, you don't know when you're going to see that finish line. And I think that the same thing holds true for economic incidents like this, where you don't know when the market will begin to turn. And figuring out ways to truly use the time constructively has been a help to me, and I think to our staff, in feeling like there's purpose, there is reason every day. Even if that project you may have been working on gets delayed, there are ways that you can fill your day that are helpful to you personally in your own professional development, and also to the firm. And so we've done a lot to really use this time constructively, and I think that's one way that you can certainly kind of make lemons into lemonade, so to speak.
So we have a question from Igor, and he said, what is your problem-solving approach when clients present you with a particular business problem?
Well, it really depends on what the business problem is. But the first step in any client relationship with our firm is we want to know as much as possible about our clients. And so that's why, and my husband's background is in consumer behavior and research. And, the work that we do is heavily rooted in research for that reason. A lot of our clients say that we know their business better than some of their employees, and it's true. And the reason why is because we can't be strategic on their behalf if we haven't examined what they've done in the past, what's worked, what hasn't, what does the competitive set look like? All of this kind of like marketing 101, kind of back to basics thinking, is what makes the work work. I've worked for a lot of firms that their approach is, let's create something glitzy and glossy and it looks great, but does it work for the clients at the end of the day? I've seen a lot of campaigns that have flopped for that reason, because they didn't take the time to do the upfront strategic research and planning that it takes to construct work that works. And so, it always starts with really getting to know everything inside and out. I think that a lot of the work that I'm most proud of, results from what we call creative friction internally. So this idea of bringing together multidisciplinary teams to think about work in different ways, extrapolating, successes that you might see in other industries, and how might that play out in a different industry, and not relying on like tried and true methods that, may have worked in the past. The world is always changing, and particularly in this era where technology is shifting on the daily. So I think the more that you can stay, informed, and the more that you can dive deep into client businesses, if you're talking about consulting specifically, that allows us to really be successful on behalf of our clients.
Julia, did you want to go ahead and ask your question?
Yeah, sure. So hi, I work in the Women's Center on campus, and we have a program to support women students that want to pursue entrepreneurship in STEM specifically. I was just wondering what advice you would have for women pursuing an entrepreneurial venture, and then also if you've ever experienced imposter syndrome and how you kind of dealt with that, if at all.
Oh, yes. This is my favorite question. I think about this a lot. I do a lot of mentoring with other women in business, whether they're entrepreneurs or working for somebody else. Imposter syndrome, 110%. I think the majority of my career, one thing that's happened, but I do think it's something that's made me also successful, is I'm the first one to get in. I'm the last one to leave. I work harder. I have been on teams where I'm the only woman. I work harder than anybody else. And it's because I feel that I need to be able to do that to compete on all male teams. I've felt that for sure. I've also felt, and it's surprising, the moments where I felt it, but I've felt that even now there are a lot of handshake deals that go on the golf course, kind of in male dominated circles, where I feel, like I'm sometimes, I'm having to force my seat at the table. It certainly happens for sure. I will say that as far as advice for women that are thinking about starting their own venture, I think that there are a couple of things that are very top of mind for me. A lot of times female entrepreneurship is positioned as a, quote unquote side hustle or a hobby or something cute. This idea of, what female entrepreneurship looks like is like, it's me, with a pink wall behind me drinking a mimosa, like it's fun. It's this thing I do in my spare time. And that's not reality. I think that, for women in particular, one of the hardest things is, I'm a wife, I'm a mother, I'm also deeply involved in my community. I serve on boards, I serve on committees. Entrepreneurship is something I do to feed my family. It's not something I do because it's fun. It's not easy. I chose the hard path. Entrepreneurship is an all in, toss it in, no safety net, and particularly in my case where I do it with my spouse, it's not like, if the bottom fell out, it's not like I have somebody else's salary to rely on. So I would say that, you need to treat it seriously. It's serious. Don't let the models of female entrepreneurship out there, kind of the highlight reel, make you feel bad about what you're going through when you're getting started. I think that there are a lot of women out there that feel like, well, this isn't fun. And, I'm struggling so hard just to get my business off the ground. I talk to a lot of women entrepreneurs and they're like, they make, you look at the media and they make it look so fun. And I constantly think about this idea that like you're comparing what real life really feels like to somebody's highlight reel. That's not real. So I think to be very honest with yourself about measures of success is critical. And I also think to really set those measures of success realistically. I think the other thing that's really critical is to find, I know, it sounds very standard and basic, but find either a mentor or a model or somebody that you can really bounce ideas off of, vent to, that can give you they might not be in your same industry, but they can give you guidance about like how to weather the storm a little bit, because those early days of starting a business are so challenging. Everything's new, even in my case where, I had worked at a senior level for publicly held companies. I worked for, my ad agency that I worked for in Boston before I came back to Cleveland was 750 people in my office alone. They had offices all over the world. I worked client side for Saks Fifth Avenue for several years, on the corporate level. It's not that I hadn't run things at the senior level before, but it was totally different when it was mine. It was totally different because, I always joke about the fact that my business card says CEO, but I'm also the janitor. And I'm also, I wear a lot of hats, and I had to figure it out. We had to figure out like, how do you run P&L? How do you forecast that when it's yours? How do you, find, your people that you can rely on in business? How do you develop that trust, for your vendor partners? And, I also think the other thing that's challenging is it's so much more emotional when it's yours, and that's a thing that, doesn't get talked about a lot in any entrepreneurial circle, but especially with women, because women feel like they have to be strong. They have to be, as tough as anybody because they have to be taken seriously. And it's okay to admit that like this is a thing that you care about and that you're going to work as hard, if not harder than anybody else to be successful at it, because there's a lot on the line. So I think that again, I would just, own that and recognize the fact that, it's going to be hard. It's going to be challenging, but there are definitely resources out there. I will say that the Women's Business Center here in Cleveland was extraordinary for us when we were getting started. They really helped us navigate some incredibly challenging circumstances, particularly when it comes to physical space. And I will say that the other thing that I really had no exposure to before getting into business for myself was the fact that there is a lot of financial support out there for women-based businesses. And the Women's Business Center, as well as the small business department at the City of Cleveland, was really helpful in helping us recognize how we could access that capital. And so there were a lot of people out there that, were cheering for us, that wanted us to succeed. And, and not least of those were our clients who, certainly referred us. And that's the most important thing. So when all those things work together, this can be an incredibly fulfilling life, but it's hard work, and anybody thinks that there's a point at which you can step off the gas. That's the trap, that's the part where, I've seen a lot of people fail, is they feel like, oh, we got there, we're successful, this is part of what I saw have happen with the first agency I mentioned that I worked for that no longer exists. That firm by all measures was so successful, but they took their eye off the ball when it came to new business, and they put a lot of their eggs in the same industry basket, and that was automotive. And when the recession hit and the bottom fell out, there was nowhere left to go. So, I do think you have to really have a plan, stick to it, refine and optimize that plan, and learn who you can depend on.
So you mentioned a lot about kind of serving on a board and the importance of kind of mentors and having a mentor while you're starting out. So you've done a lot of civic projects, such as helping Kent State University with their urban design, with strategic planning and other initiatives. And you also served on several boards. So how do you see the future generation making an impact on the Cleveland community?
Yeah, so, I think a lot about people coming into the business world, and, how that might change with the junior people coming in. I will say that, to me, I am not a person that necessarily thinks about things within a next gen lens. There are a lot of organizations that have like a younger cohort or a next generation kind of situation. But I found that for me, what's more successful is to think about how can people come together around common mindsets, despite generation, kind of generational differentiators, and drive change. Some of the most, I would say, like, crucial innovation that I've seen, particularly in Northeast Ohio, hasn't, I think there's this idea of like fresh blood, like bringing in fresh blood, and that idea being like it should be younger people coming in. I think younger people are are an important part of the equation. I also think it's really important not to discount people, because they might be of a certain age. I have mentors and people that I truly think of as friends that are in their 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s. And, I have been able to collaborate with them in really innovative ways, in the same way that I collaborate with some of my, young staff that might be really savvy when it comes to technology, but may not have the life or the work experience that allows them to apply that technology quite yet. So I think those are where the most interesting projects come from, is like really thinking about developing teams with a lot of different perspectives, but that shared passion and that shared drive to see success, and making sure that everyone has that like open mind and open heart to really welcome new ideas. It's really hard. I think that's the hard thing about, particularly when you think about young generation challenges. There's a lot of conversation around managing millennials. Technically, I fall at the older end of that bracket. I'm like what do they call us, an exennial now or whatever. But I think that, there's a lot of conversation about how do you manage young people, how do you, this kind of thing. And I think it's less about that. And I think it's more about, how do you model behaviors that you want all employees to share? And how do you set expectations around what great work looks like? And then finding a roadmap where you can get to that together, and making sure everybody's open to ideas from every member of a team. And that team could be a work team, that could be a board, that could be a committee, but making sure that somebody doesn't get shut down just because they're young or they're old or they didn't work in this industry. I'm reading right now, Mort Mandel's book called It's All About Who, and it's all about leadership. And it's a fantastic book for any entrepreneur or anybody in leadership. I've meant to read it for about 2 years now, and I'm finally getting to it. That's part of what I'm doing with my extra time. So Doug, to answer your question, hopefully I'll be reading more this summer. But I think, one of the things, there's a lot of really good information in there about, how teams can come together, but, having that shared set of values and letting things drive from that. And I think that's a really critical thing that I'm taking away from that book. And really, working hard to get the talent mix right, getting those A players on board early so that when push comes to shove, when things get tough, like they are now, you have the right people sitting around the table and you can solve these problems together.
So when we talk about the helping to build the community around us, I know that your firm does an event every year that sort of helps reach out to the community. And if I get the name wrong, correct me, but Shark Attack.
Yes.
So talk to us a little bit about how you feel, especially businesses in a local community, have a responsibility to give back, or how that giving back helps build your firm.
So, and this is another thing that's talked about a lot in the book I'm reading right now, but a big piece of what I think makes certain businesses successful and others not is values and integrity, and starting there. And, that was something that was critical to me when we founded the firm, was being very transparent about the types of things that we care about, and letting people know that, yes, we want to be able to bring in enough money that I can pay my staff and everybody can have, a living wage and, we all feel good. But we also want to be the kind of company that people are excited to get up in the morning and come to work for. And so, we do a number of different community-based things, but what it really starts from is we considered a lot of different spaces around Cleveland when we decided to put down roots here. And we looked long and hard for the right environment. And the first thing we did was we found a space we wanted to be in a neighborhood. We wanted to be in a place that was walkable. We wanted to be in a place that is diverse and that looks for opportunities for true inclusion. And so public transportation in terms of socioeconomic diversity and accessibility was really important to us. And so all of those things made Shaker Square the logical choice for us, and being a part of the Buckeye neighborhood of Cleveland. And so that was the first piece of it, was really being a part in a physical sense of the neighborhood. Once we rooted ourselves there, we looked for ways that we could give back. So in addition to Shark Attack, which I will talk about in a minute, we also have what we call our Read Aloud program, where we partner with a school in the Cleveland Municipal School District, Harvey Rice Elementary School, and we come in and we read to their class monthly. It's really important to us to promote literacy, because we see that as a path to not just educational success, but also professional success later in life. And so we go in and read, and we also gift books to the school to build their library as well. And on a more kind of broad business level, we look for opportunities to give back. So we have a whole nonprofit portion of our practice. We offer heavily discounted rates to nonprofits. And, that's because, we do care about the community. I mean, this is a part of my value system. I believe it's a part of everybody at our firm's value system, that we find ways to give back. And, the kind of like jewel in the crown of that is our Shark Attack. And so every year on Giving Tuesday, we donate a day's worth of consulting services to an area nonprofit, and we allow area nonprofits to apply with a specific business challenge they're facing. And then we come in and we kind of go through the same kind of onboarding practice that we are a process that we go through with any of our clients, where we sit down, we really understand the organization to the best of our ability within a couple of hours, and then we do sort of a rapid R&D process on the project that they're being challenged with at the moment, and we come back to them with suggestions. So this year our Shark Attack awardee was the Julia de Burgos Cultural Arts Center in the city of Cleveland, and we've helped them think about how they can really extend their reach and their impact with Latinx youth in our city. And so that was an extremely rewarding project that we've worked on, and we've worked with a lot of other organizations in the past that has really led them to think about their work in a different way. So that's something we're really proud of.
Awesome. So Carlton asked what advice you have for women trying to learn how to network at the very beginning of their careers.
So I think the most important thing is networking is hard. I'm a person who's out there a lot, in the public realm, but it was funny. I was speaking with my son's pediatrician recently, and he's like talking about different types of personality types. And he's like, "Oh, I think you're an introverted extrovert." And I'm like, "What does that mean?" And it's very much so how I operate. I'm out there a lot. I have no problems going out and talking to people, but I'm like kind of an inherently shy person. And so, I feel kind of socially anxious in certain situations where I've got to go into a big room and network with a bunch of people I don't know. It's not a comfortable place for me to be. But what I had to do early in my career was really go out there and force myself to do it, and find ways where I could be more comfortable in those situations. I found that I was much more comfortable, and I am in every situation if I have time to prepare. And so if I know that I'm going into a room full of people that have a common interest, really doing my homework on, what is that common interest if I don't know much about it? What's happening in that industry at the moment, and giving myself some talking points so that I at least had a place to start conversations, because it's so much easier to network once you get into the conversation and that you are having a dialogue with somebody else and you're able to keep up. So I think, allowing yourself to prepare and not feel like, oh, I have to go into this room and like be this like magical entertainer, this like master conversationalist. Like, I think that that's one of the most important things that you can think about. The other thing is, a lot of people are nervous when it comes to networking. It's not an easy thing to do, to insert yourself into a conversation and like make new friends, so to speak. So practice, I think that that's important. I think, going out, and that's, when I'm talking about in-person networking. The other thing that I think is really critical is, again, like I said at the beginning of the conversation, and it applies to jobs, but it also applies to the process that it takes to actually secure a job, or secure a position on a board or anything like that, is looking for those people that have done it successfully. And sometimes it's as easy as raising your hand and saying, I really love what you've done and I want to learn how to do it. Would you be willing to, have a conversation with me for 30 minutes? And you would be surprised, particularly in Cleveland, how accessible people are and how willing people are to grow talent from the ground up. I was incredibly grateful when I moved back here. Even though I'd grown up in Cleveland, I hadn't lived here for over 10 years, and Cleveland had changed so much. And my network, my professional network, was very limited here. And I was surprised at how many people I reached out to that were like, oh yeah, I'll have coffee with you, or we can talk on the phone or whatever. And I mean, these are people like, like Dave Gilbert and Terry, over at Greater Cleveland Partnership, and Terry Schwartz over at Kent State Urban Design Collaborative. And I mean, people that, they had plenty on their plates. It wasn't like they had to take a half an hour out of their day and sit down with me and impart, any sort of advice, but they did it because they are the type of people that really care about growing that next gen.
So I received a private message asking how you set expectations with your employees and how you measure those expectations.
Absolutely. So, I had an employee say to me when I first started the firm that I have incredibly high expectations, and that's very true. I think that, in order for us to be the best that we can be for our clients, we have to hold ourselves to a higher standard. We have to be the kind of firm where good isn't good enough, where we always get to great. And it takes a while to figure out what getting to great looks like. And so we do a lot of things to educate before it even comes down to the employee by employee level. One of the things that we do is we have a reoccurring internal event called Cool Hunting at the firm, where we encourage every employee to show up with something that inspired them over the last month. That could be business related, that could be an exhibit they went to, that could be something they saw while walking down the street, that could be a customer service experience, that could be just something that interests them, that could be a new music video that came out or a piece of technology. It could literally be anything. But we're trying to identify what great looks like in lots of different forms. And so sharing that with each other allows us to have conversation about great work. And so that's one way that we model behavior is, sharing our thoughts, our research, and letting everybody cross-share their research so that we can learn together. The other thing that we do to set expectations is we talk about industry standards. And we really, try and practice continual education in the things that we talk about around the firm, as well as making sure that every member of our team has the ability for continued learning. So, that could be certainly a course, like something offered at Case. It could also be, a webinar. It could also be a conference. And so we look for the right types of continuing ed for our employees, to be sure that, if there is something that, for example, if there are certain skills that I'm like, okay, I've taken it as far as I can with our internal resources, and now I have to get you some external training, we need to make that investment to make sure that they're set up for success. Beyond that, it's very clear to employees. I make sure that in my management style, I am very, very clear in my language that I use, that our employees understand, like, this is what I want you to do. This is the expectation. This is what success looks like. And if we're falling short, having really honest conversations with employees about, I said this on that call. I was expecting that it would be done by today. Can you talk to me about why that might not have happened? And let's figure out how we can avoid this in the future. So looking for opportunities to really train in the moment is critical. And then beyond that, as I mentioned before, we do have what we call monthly conclaves. So those are one-on-one meetings with your supervisor to talk about the good, the bad, the ugly, right? Like talking about your performance plan, what's working well. It also gives me a time not just to set expectations and talk about where they're falling short, but also say, like, hey, you blew me out of the water with this. Like, I thought that you wouldn't be able to get to this measure of success until next year, but you're doing it now. And I'm seeing that you're actually ready to move into a new role now. We had an employee where that happened, where, she was ready. She was just ready to go to that next level. She was ready to move into a new role. And it happened faster than we would have thought. And we made that change. And so I think it's really important to be communicating those things, over and over again, to be consistent with employees, to make sure that they understand that they know where they're going to surprise and delight you. They also know where you're going to be disappointed, and to make sure that, you don't let it slide. I think the other thing that's really critical with management is you have to treat everybody the same. You can't play favorites. And if somebody is falling behind, you owe it to them and you owe it to the rest of the team to address those things as quickly as possible. And then, obviously, outside of coaching in the moment and all these ongoing things, we have our annual reviews where we set aside time to really be thorough with our employees and go through everything and make sure they know where they stand. More than anything, I'm a person who over communicates. I'm not a micromanager, but I'm going to be constantly in communication with my staff about projects so that they know that it's not just I'm trying to keep eyes on things. It's important to me that we get to great. And if I feel like there's a way that we can do it, there's no project that's too small at my firm for me to step into. It could be a singular social media post, or it could be a massive campaign for our largest clients that we're working on. I tend to be a person that travels around from account to account and makes sure that everything is getting the attention that it deserves, and that our clients feel the support, but that also our staff knows this is what the expectation is. And I am here also to support you on that, not just to ask you to go the road alone.
We have about 5 minutes left, and I have one, and then I know Queenie has one more question for you. When you're thinking about early stage entrepreneurs or early stage startups, doing multi-channel communications or multi-channel ways to make your presence known in the community is extremely important. And I know from some of the things that your firm does, you have a podcast, Open Swim, that you talk about industry specific issues. What advice would you give to early stage startups or entrepreneurs as they're evaluating the different channels for getting the word out about who they are, what they stand for, and where their areas of expertise are?
Yeah, so, there was a question earlier about, I think Sarah was saying that she has her own consulting firm and how to make sure to, you may be known for a lot of different things, but how to make it clear, to clients what you do. I think that that's where it starts, is what are you passionate about? What do you do well? And what is your position in the marketplace? Once you establish that, it's going to be clear who you are for as a business. Once you determine that, it becomes a lot easier to say, okay, here's where I need to put my message so that I can get in front of the right people. The podcast, for example, it came out of a few different things. One, I'm a total podcast junkie. I listen to podcasts all the time. My husband always says to me, like, how do you find the time to listen to that? I'm always listening to podcasts. I'm like a ravenous consumer of information. I'm reading, I'm listening, I'm always learning. But I think that, it holds true for a lot of decision makers that they're busy and they're on the go. And so the other thing I knew about podcasts from the trade publications and all the research that we do is that a lot of C-suite level executives are listening to podcasts because they're on the go all the time. It's an easy thing for them to consume, on their commute on a train, or while they're in a car, or while they're sitting in line to pick up their kids from, soccer practice or whatever the case may be. That's a way that you can reach them. It's also a way for us to reach people when there isn't a lot of distraction. I'm always thinking about divergent media. And, obviously digital is a big part of anybody's media mix right now. It has to be. We're online all the time. But it's also a very congested landscape. And so for digital to work well, the content has to be great. So again, this comes back to driving towards great. And for us, that's why, we decided in the last year to bring multimedia, and motion-based motion and sound in-house, because we were finding that we work with, and we still work with outside vendors as well as on a case-by-case basis, but we were finding that we wanted to be able to prototype work more quickly. And we had something specific in mind when we thought about what great work looked like within the motion, sound, and audio space. And so, for us, we made some decisions about that. We made a huge investment in bringing that in-house. Hiring 2 employees to staff that department in addition to myself. And as I mentioned, I was a film major many, many, many moons ago and have worked extensively in broadcast. And so that was sort of like a nice little hat I got to put on. But that's really what it comes down to is, taking what you know about who you are, who your business is, who you want to be, and who you're for. And once you answer those questions, it's a lot easier to answer the question of where does my message need to be? And if you can't figure those things out on your own, that's a really good place for whether it's a firm like ours or a mentor or a coach or somebody, that's a good place to bounce ideas, because the more you talk through it, I think you'll start to unlock, oh, that's an interesting idea. Maybe that's something I hadn't thought of before that could really break through the clutter.
Awesome. So you sort of answered my question as well. Thank you so much for your answers. Doug, do you have anything to add?
Thank you so much for your time today, Hallie, and Queenie. Thank you for moderating. I think that entrepreneurship here in Cleveland is something that we want to see continue to grow. And I think Shark and Minnow is kind of a great model to look at for, what entrepreneurs could be. So thank you so much for taking the time. Just a quick note, we do have another talk tomorrow with Aditi Shah. She's the program manager of Honda Innovations. So if you want to learn a little bit more about the auto industry, what innovation looks like there and how they're being impacted by COVID-19, please tune in tomorrow at 1:00 and have a great rest of your day. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.